Good morning, everyone. I think this was a little bit of a premature panel because venture building is still at its nascent phases in Egypt, but we have such experienced people that I think I'm the one who's nascent about venture building, and they will tell us a lot more. So I'm really curious about their perspectives today. I've known each one of them for a long time, and I'm not going to say how long because I don't have gray hair like them. I'm on the younger side. But I've continued to learn so much from them over the years. I'll just go around giving everyone just 1 minute, like we said, to introduce themselves. Starting with Walid right over there, so he knows that we're here and can tell us more. I've known Walid more as a very active healthcare investor, but he's also a very active financial services investor. And I'd love to know what you're doing now and how it relates to venture building.
Thank you, Amal. And I'll ignore your note about the gray hair. This is just a look that we're keeping for the market. My name is Walid Bakr. I've been in that industry, sadly to admit, for a bit over 22 years now, spanning venture capital, investment banking, and private equity for the last 12 years. And I've been engaged across a wide number of industries, mostly in Egypt and North Africa, with a focus mostly on healthcare, financial services, and education. More recently, I've been focused on the venture capital and angel investment. I've been active with a number of angel groups and collaborating with some of my colleagues here on setting up an angel investment fund. So it's a fund not only focused on investing in early stage startups, but part of the thesis is enabling a vehicle for lots of active angel investors to be able to build portfolios and actively support them as part of a structured investment vehicle. We are hoping to launch within the next few months. In parallel, I'm still active on the advisory work on some of the fields that Amal mentioned, particularly on healthcare and financial services. And I sit on the boards of a number of public and private enterprises, as well as actively investing my own money in small startups over the past 1.5 years. Thank you, Amal.
Of course. Walid and I have, acted on several sides of different transactions and sometimes on the same side, and I have to say it's much better when on the same side. May we continue to do that more often. So I'm really excited about what you're doing now.
Thank you.
And Dr. Khaled is someone who I've worked with a lot also on both sides of transactions and many times on the same side. I've learned so much on VC investing from actually Dr. Khaled, primarily because he is a serial entrepreneur, very active operator, operated, scaled, and sold businesses. So one of the few who actually sold businesses in Egypt and had successful exits, and hence, more active on the angel investment side. But I'd love to see how this now came together into a fund structure and what your thoughts about venture building is. So please tell the audience a little bit more about yourself, and we'll dig into that later.
Thank you, Amal. Always a pleasure to be at Techne and with such a distinguished panel. I spent a long time doing many things, but among them, as a serial entrepreneur for 20 years, since the early 90s until 2012. I started up 7 companies. I exited 5 of them. 2 were quite successful. And I learned a lot of things not to do, and that is very helpful to know all the mistakes, not all, most of the big mistakes that are common. I made all of them. So it helped me in the last 10 years to become probably a better investor for 2 reasons. One is because I learned about these mistakes, but also very importantly is that I've been through the journey of being an entrepreneur, which is a very tough roller coaster emotional journey. And I can understand startups, I can understand the entrepreneurs when they are under pressure and when they are happy and when they are sad. And all of these things are very subtle, but they are very important for investors to know, so they can, not just put money and put pressure on startups to give returns, but to be part of the journey of success. So that's what we have been trying to do in 23 companies that we invested in so far. And more recently, I saw an opportunity also to take Egyptian companies and help them really expand geographically outside Egypt into Africa, where I have a lot of connections and activities, and I could see the potential. There are very good ideas coming out here that have a limited market or limited ceiling, and they need to expand by going into other countries, and that is the new fund that we're establishing. So from entrepreneur to angel to VC to growth, I think all of that has fitted and you know, came at the right time in my lifetime to give back in one way or the other. So I hope I can contribute to this panel something positive. Thank you.
Contributed to the entire ecosystem a lot. I am witness to that, and I think Dr. Khaled is definitely someone who brings, you know, the operator empathy into his investment style. But more so, I really appreciated that he was always investing outside of Cairo, like really geographically, whether it's in Mansoura, Alexandria, a lot of companies throughout, geographically dispersed in Egypt, and I'm excited to then see them go outside of Egypt altogether into Africa. That would be fun. I won't say really how long I have known Hany Assaad, because that I will have to reveal a lot more about my age than I want to. So we go way back since my IFC days, and his IFC years were much longer than mine too. And I'm really excited that, you know, last week he launched Avanz Manara, and it's such a strong testament to the potential of fund managers in Egypt today, and, you know, your expertise in then growing them and bringing Egypt on the map for emerging fund managers. So I'd love to hear more, and please tell them more, because I know more about you than they do.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Hany Assaad. I start with the end and I work to the old days. So the end part is that we just launched the first private sector fund of funds for Egypt, i.e. a fund that invests in other funds. Somebody told me today it's like the top of the food chain. I don't know how that is, but anyway, we launched it last Wednesday. We have the banks and insurance companies behind us, and we're bringing in more of the domestic institutional investors, mostly banks and other institutional investors in Egypt to join us. The idea is, how do we get the big money into the startups and small business and medium businesses in Egypt? So how can a big bank be part of a small investment? That is what our mandate is. And we have 2 or 3 years to invest this money with all our friends and colleagues around here, from the angel investors or angel funds all the way to the growth private equity funds. So it's a whole range, and it's how do we do that well, commercially, and very importantly in a very responsible way, which for us means sustainability, achieving the sustainable development goals, and how do we leave behind a much greater legacy for entrepreneurs in Egypt and increase that ecosystem to make it the best in the world. So my journey is that I was at IFC, the National Finance Corporation, for a long time. I've invested in everything from very large steel companies, I mean huge steel companies, to the micro of the all scales. I started microfinance in IFC in the year 2000, commercial microfinance. We invested in banks, leasing companies, and I think I can pride myself for having invested in over 100 funds across emerging markets, and we've covered everything from China, currently even China, Brazil, India, all of Africa, the rest of Latin America. Very much like Jack, we've covered the entire world, and we invest entire what I call growth markets, which are emerging markets. So it's not the rest. The rest may not be growing as fast, but there is a great energy, and that's what we're capitalizing on in what we call emerging markets or growth markets. So I've invested in everything direct and funds across the board, and we're looking forward to investing a great deal in Egypt. Our goal is to make the ecosystem, which is everything from real startups all the way to the mid-sized companies, the best in the world. Why? Because Egypt is positioned today as a growth market quite significantly, but it's the percent of capital invested compared to the size of the economy is way below its comparables. So we have a long way to go, and that's what we're here to do.
And I think it's just terribly exciting that this is happening now, and that you're seeing a range from angel investing all the way to growth capital on the private equity side. So it's really, you know, a demonstration of the maturity of the market, which is really really promising for people like me. So I'll tell you a little bit about Lotus before we move on to Ahmed, because I've been getting a lot of questions on who is Lotus and what are you guys up to. And I have to reveal the secret now that it's out anyway. So we're starting a new fund as well called the Lotus Capital, focused on sustainability and inclusive growth. My partner Yasmina is here also today, which makes me very excited. And yeah, the future is very scary, but also very, very promising for gender lens investing too. And we hope to bring more access to markets for underrepresented founders and for more women to have to be part of the growth that we're seeing in Egypt today. So, Ahmed, tell us what is happening at Egypt Ventures now, and how did you know, what's your journey to go to Egypt Ventures?
Okay. My name is Ahmed Gomaa. I've been investing since May 1999 in Egypt, a long time ago. We were lucky to meet exciting startups like Masrawi, buying into Otlub back then, buying into things like IT Works, one of the great software development houses in Egypt. We were also lucky to make some investments in in Fawri. But in general, I've been working in this space. It's been a learning curve. Since we started a long time ago, things were different. Today, we find bright entrepreneurs like yourselves coming up with the most amazing concepts. Actually, we learn from you nowadays. Back in the old days, maybe we gave more, but now we're learning from you guys a lot of things. And to be honest, I'm very excited to compare between back in 1999 and today. It took a long time to get your first IPO on the ground, Fawri. Today, I think within the next 5 years, you'll probably have 5. So that's an amazing, exciting time.
Fingers crossed for that. I'm very hopeful. So I'm going to start with the top of the food chain, I guess, with you, Hany, because I'd like us to just get the macro view first of a view of the value chain, how you see the range or the spectrum of fund managers today in Egypt, and accordingly, the new concept that we're seeing growing, which is venture building. Because now that there are more serial entrepreneurs, more exits, more people with operational experience who are now investing and have a lot of value to add from an investment perspective, given their operational expertise and the empathy that Dr. Khaled talked about. How do they fit into that value chain as you see it? And what is that value chain really looking like?
So I should start by saying what I always say. You may have heard me say that before, but what we are doing is democratizing investments, i.e. making sure that those good innovations in businesses get funded. In the past, you had to have a lot of money to start a company. We're trying to change that. We're trying to change it to make it that we start with good innovations that get funded, and then it goes through what we call an ecosystem growth. Which means you have from the startups to the VC, to the PE, and then to the listing, or maybe directly to the listing, or other ways to make the companies grow. So the growth is what we focus on. So how do we grow is that when there is an entire ecosystem, there must be the angel investors who support the innovators, such as the number of them that you've heard of. And Walid will tell us more about that space. We are also interested in the venture capital. The venture capital covers everything from the early stage to late stage VC. We found that VC and PE don't talk to each other. I'll give you an example. In India, had a huge VC space and a huge PE space, and the two did not connect. Only 3 or 4 years ago, was the first fund that managed to do between VC and PE and carried some companies from the VC space to the PE space. So we are trying to make it happen earlier in Egypt than in India and other parts of the world. So how do we link all the different funds together? And what I should say that in Egypt, what we found is that the ecosystem, i.e. the fund managers, the investors, talk to each other and collaborate a lot more than other markets. And that we think is a characteristic of this particular market, which we don't find because everywhere else they're very competitive. But here you'll find the collaboration to make sure a company is can go through this growth stage in a way that they get funded at every stage is something we want to enhance more of. So I'll give you just the numbers. There are about over 90 funds investing in Egypt. That's all international funds and funds that are investing in Egypt, out of which about 28 are actually domiciled, or at least the fund managers are in Egypt or have location in Egypt. And so when you look at that, that's a large number of funds, and people don't know that. When we talk to our investors and we tell them there are 28 funds that are located in Egypt, they tell us, where are they? So they themselves don't know, but you as entrepreneurs also don't know who they are. So our goal is to make sure that we know who they are, what do they do, what's just different strategies, whom do you go to for what? And what we also want to make sure is that these fund managers talk to each other and also talk to the entrepreneurs, and the entrepreneurs know what they're looking for. So we need to all these linkages to make the whole universe grow a great deal more. We can go through the different stages because we have very important partners around us. What do they do within that ecosystem to make it grow?
I love that, exactly. It's how do we, improve the dialogue and grow the dialogue between the different players and bridging the gaps to just feed into growth and feed into higher innovation. So I'll jump to Walid on that one because, you've been on the private equity side, the large private equity side, and now you're more on the angel investment side. How do you see the gaps between both, and how can that be bridged?
I mean, thank you, Amal. Let's put it that way. I mean, I'm going back full circle, but going back really to the roots. So if you don't have startups to invest in, ultimately people who work in private equity will ultimately not find anything to invest in as well. But looking at the state of play, at the state of affairs, despite the growth in venture capital activity significantly over the past few years, and particularly over 2020 and 2021, 2021 being a record year that smashed all records. You're talking about venture capital investments almost nearing $700 billion in 2021, from almost double the levels of 2020. Yet if you look a little bit into more detail into these numbers, you'll find that the majority of this increase has gone actually to the mega rounds. So most of that rise has been in companies raising over $100 million, and a significant part of that has been actually to companies raising $1 billion plus. So when you look at the numbers, in terms of absolute numbers, most of the funding growth that happened over the last period has been directed towards later rounds, larger companies. And while we've seen a growth and an increase in early stage funding as well, it has not been as staggering. Despite the increase in the number of activities, despite the increasing entrepreneurial activity, despite the number of entrepreneurs coming out, despite the serial entrepreneurs having successful exits and starting multiple companies. So we are seeing that gap growing in early stage funding. And a big part of that gap is if you look at the people backing these companies at the venture capital funds, also over the course of 2020 and 2021, we've seen a significant growth in the funds under management by these VCs. So suddenly when you have a VC who's managing $20 million, he's looking to invest in a portfolio of 20 companies with, let's say, $500,000 to $1 million each. When that same venture capital is suddenly managing $200 million, he's no longer looking at these small companies. He's looking to deploy larger amounts of money. So the question begs itself, then who will fund these companies? What will happen in 2 to 3 years when you have all of these VCs who are looking to deploy money but not finding companies to invest in? We're seeing parts of that already now with the increased valuations that are happening globally, with the average ticket sizes that globally on early rounds have almost tripled over the last 3 years, while the smaller companies are still struggling. Hence, there is, I wouldn't say a duty, but for successful entrepreneurs who've turned VCs like Dr. Khaled, for people who have observed the market at a macro scale like Hany and others, to actually do much more over the coming period to ensure that we are seeding the market, we are supporting today's, I would say, greatest entrepreneurs. We're seeing greater companies than ever, we're seeing better entrepreneurs than ever, but yet probably the funding challenges for the early stage are actually greater than ever as well.
That is interesting, because you sometimes hear, is the market overheating? There's too much money in VC, but then, like you said, is it too much money chasing fewer assets? Why I always also appreciated Dr. Khaled's perspective on that one, because you really went for underrepresented founders a lot, whether it's women, whether it's people outside of Cairo, and I think I'd love to hear about how your operational expertise helped in those companies, and are you seeing more operators now investing and adopting that venture building model?
I think what we've been doing as angel investors fits very well to the theme of this panel, which is venture building. What is venture building? It's when you bring extra talent to a small or medium or startup company that can really operate. So there is no lack of ideas, there is no lack of youth who want to start up companies and so on, for sure, in Egypt. But quite often there is lack of experience / adequate talent. Let me put it this way, as blunt as it is, there is that lack. And it's not only in Egypt. I mean, many countries are suffering, including the US at some point in time was suffering from the lack of, certain skills. The US can attract them from all over the world. In Egypt, it's uncommon to bring talent from outside Egypt. So we'd have to live with what we have. And given the speed that a startup has to operate at, we as investors could not find any other solution but to use our own experience and learning curves to be part of the journey. Of course, the price is lots of work. We had to do a lot of work with each and every company. Imagine you spend 10 hours a month times 23 companies. That's already 230 hours you spend face-to-face with them, besides the extra work that you have to do. So it becomes almost a full-time job. That's the problem of trying to help startups. But on the other hand, had there been, the skilled and the experienced entrepreneurs in all of these companies, we could have, and it's happening with time. So in our portfolio, for instance, out of 23, we dissect them into different stages, and some of them we don't have to do as much anymore. We're comfortable that what we did in the first 2-3 years is now enough. Or we've managed to raise money for them through a VC which is taking over. And now we can do a little bit less and focus on the newer ones. So it's an issue of managing the stage that the startups are at. And if we talk more broader SMEs, I think those need even much more help than even startups, because SMEs, they have a very small box they operate in, while the world is much bigger than that box. If nobody opens up and says, hey guys, you're building this great company in Mansoura, or you're in Enan or Assaad, and you're doing this very good job, why don't you just go bigger? There is always resistance at SME level to think bigger. And it's surprising because startups typically live on growing bigger, but SMEs are scared to grow bigger actually, because it takes them to another world that they are scared of. More travel, harder work, communication skills that they may not have, etc., etc. But we as investors really need to help those. Those are the future of Egypt. The dormant, small and medium, who can potentially turn into bigger entities, and so on. These companies make up half or more of the European economy. If you go to Germany, what they call Mittelstand in Germany is a big chunk of the German economy, because there are skilled people who have built entities and grew them to be partners of Mercedes and partners of BMW and partners as small companies or medium companies. We don't have that yet. And I think this is what we need to focus on, including, as I said earlier, growing them into Africa, because what we found out is that there are a lot of commonalities between the problems in Egypt and the problems all over the continent. Health, education, agriculture, just name it. You take the problem, you have a good solution, go and expand. Don't limit yourself to, this ceiling. Double your ceiling, triple your ceiling in 2-3 years. That's what we need to see.
That is what we need to see. So what is Egypt Ventures doing about that in terms of both financing and increasing or helping talent to grow the way Dr. Khaled just described?
Well, we started by investing in accelerators. That was our first point of entry. So we invested in Flat 6 Labs. We created our own Falak, and we also invested in Egypt's first fintech accelerator with EFG. So that was the part on the early stage. We also have our direct VC activity, which starts from $200,000 to $2 million. So we kind of take the full spectrum, a big part of the spectrum there. Now, the thing about, I share with all of you, there is a, to be able to spot talent has always been a challenge. It's improving in the last, I'd say, 3 years. I remember the pipeline in 2019 and was a little bit much smaller than it is today. So there is a surge, and I can most probably want to point that the success of Swivel had something to do with this. People got more excited. So I think it's a very important part on our part here to try and share stories about successful entrepreneurs and how they impacted the community. I believe this will be one very important part of bringing in entrepreneurs to the table. Again, thank you. Wonderful performances. None that I've seen before.
Well, I hope to see more. I don't want to, dominate the questions, so I'll take it to the audience to see what they're curious about, and now's your chance. This is an exceptional panel of really experienced people. So if I were you, I would jump away at that right now. Any questions? Okay, well, I will continue. Hany, I wanted to go back to see, honestly for me, I'm born and raised in Egypt. My primary investing experience has been predominantly in this country. And I'm curious to know if what we're witnessing is unique to our economy and, the growth that we're seeing now and the rise of the landscape as it is today. I would love to see how you compare it to other emerging markets, especially on the venture building segment. Like what we're seeing now, is that more commonly seen, and are we behind, or like where we should be at this stage of our growth as a market?
So just to give some perspective, if you had asked my firm 3 years ago, would we invest in Egypt, and our investors would have told us no. I mean, that's how bad it was at that time. We were told, do not.
3 years ago, was that bad?
3 years ago, our investors told us, do not invest in Egypt. And now the shift is the other way around. They're willing to put more money in Egypt than before. Those kind of shifts happen around the world. It's just everything is relative. So when you look at Egypt compared to other countries, 3 years ago, India was at the top, China was doing exceptionally well, even Brazil who had gone through very difficult times had picked up and valuations were rising quite rapidly. And then around Africa, there are a few countries, Kenya and even Ethiopia had picked up more. So there are a lot of interest in other parts of the world. But if you look at the VC space in particular, so what we call financing the entrepreneurs and the startups space, that space 5 years ago was nearly non-existent in emerging markets from big money. I'm talking about big money coming into it. It evolved greatly. So when I was at IFC, the last thing we did was venture. We did a few experiments here and there. I have to tell you, did not work very well. And we did even in China and India and Africa and Latin America, and they were not great. But in the last few years, venture has picked up significantly more, which tells you that innovation is becoming a global phenomenon outside of its borders, i.e. that with digitization, a company can reach way beyond where it's located, whether it is in Upper Egypt to reach US or to reach Asia. That is possible today. Some years ago, it was not possible. So you have to think of it that this is a major change that's happening globally. The other thing that one has to put in perspective, and again, everything is relative, is that there is a lot of money chasing deals around the world. And because of that, valuations go way up. And when the valuations go way up, investors try and look for where innovation is cheaper, if I can say that, i.e. the price of entry into companies is lower than other places. Egypt is such destination today, even though we hear that many companies are overpriced or oversubscribed. That's a very good phenomenon. That tells you that the market is ready to put money into Egyptian companies that are growing fast. So now is the opportunity, and that opportunity will last a few years for entrepreneurs and for investors to take advantage of this money coming that's looking for a place to invest around the world and finding pockets. So there are multiple things, as we talked about, that are considered. One of them is the macroeconomic situation. That's very important. The political stability, et cetera, all that part. Regardless of how you view the recent devaluation, et cetera, Egypt is still a very attractive market. Why? Because you heard today the chairman of ETIDA telling us that the regulators and the government is taking a very active role to make it happen for this entire industry. That is the part of government. Then there are the rest of us who are investing in funds. That is, if you see the number of new funds in Egypt, is unbelievable compared to its size of that market. And then when you see international investors coming to Egypt and looking, as we have seen earlier, Jack is here, we heard Jeff earlier, number of other international investors are here. They're looking for ways to invest in this market. So this is a market to within the context globally, it's a market to look at. And then for the Egyptian entrepreneurs to make sure you succeed well, so you can attract more money in the future. So your success makes our life easier to attract more money as we grow this entire market.
So if you didn't get the hint yet, now is the time. Capitalize on the next couple of years because Egypt is hot. Not just weather-wise, actually hot for investing and growth. On that, we can't have a panel where we don't talk about sectors. Which sectors are then hot and lend themselves more to venture building? So Walid, given you have invested across, fintech, education, healthcare, you've been across different sectors. Which ones would you focus more on, particularly as it relates to venture building and its needs for operational expertise, talent, in addition to financing, of course?
I mean, that's quite a difficult question because you've asked the question, but you've looked at two facets of it. I mean, the latter part of the question asks, where would you find things would you need most talent, activity, entrepreneurs, while from a pure investment perspective, you'd ultimately looking about sectors that can grow and ultimately yield value and results and growth to entrepreneurs. And these two things do not necessarily align on every time. Obviously, we've been witnessing the obvious in emerging markets globally over the past few years on the fintech and financial services, basically to fill up a gap of a significant underserved, represented community who didn't have access to classical financial services, and we're seeing that gap being bridged by the fintech companies across the globe, particularly in emerging markets. I think the coming period is going to witness lots of interesting stuff on the healthcare side, not purely from the healthcare technology side, but also from the healthcare services and healthcare models, where lots is happening now across the globe to redefine and rebuild the legacy models in healthcare, given the shortcomings of the current models in serving the needs of the market. And we're seeing increasing actually interest in what we'd refer to as deep tech or core tech. So essentially going back to areas like, not going back, but focusing more on material technology, biosciences, AI, essentially technologies that are going to redefine many of the sectors and many of the offerings that we see now. So the next wave, I see it coming for health services across the board and increasing focus on core tech and deep tech.
Wow, that requires like real expertise. So Dr. Khaled and I have invested in healthcare together several times, and I've always appreciated your perspectives, particularly when it comes to healthcare. But I want to go back to something you've kept emphasizing several times in the panel today, which is growth to Africa. How are you seeing that happening? Is it more you're seeing Africa-born companies expanding into Egypt and looking at acquisition opportunities in Egypt, or are you seeing from your portfolio companies that are now able to scale outside of Egypt, they've gotten enough scale here, and in which sectors particularly are you seeing these trends, and how would you as an investor be able to enable that?
I think quite pragmatically, my challenge is actually the lack of innovation. The innovative companies and ideas that we see are very few. There are lots of Me Too's. When we say fintech, there are 100 now, okay? 5 or 6 will succeed and 95 will not make it because it's just a Me Too, and the winner will take a big chunk and there will not be room for 100 winners. Same thing happened in the US. I was actually part of a startup in California which was doing Wi-Fi back in 1999 when there was no Wi-Fi, and there were 110 startups at the same time doing Wi-Fi. What was left and the winners were 3, and 107 went bust because everybody was chasing the same thing. And that is lack of innovation. I see that in e-commerce. I see that in marketplaces. When Uber came, everybody wants to do the Uber of this and the Uber of that and the Uber of this and the Uber of that. Okay, some will win. There will be winners like Swivel. It's the Uber of buses. But many others who are just Me Too's will not make it. What we need is innovation that also not only comes from IT and software and so on, and platforms, but we have very good chemistry in this country. We have graduates who understand chemistry, biology, material science in the numbers of 25,000 to 30,000 grads a year. This is a big number of people who understand some fundamentals that they can use to build good solutions, and very innovative actually. We invested in several of them who rely on chemistry, who rely on biology, or who rely on microbiology, and the innovation is there, and it's not a bloodbath like fintech and like e-commerce. So we look for those. But then you ask me about Africa. Whenever I find a good one that has penetrated and innovated, it's a waste not to expand it. That's my feeling. If they have already developed something so innovative and so good that works in Egypt, why not take it to other countries who don't have the same solution yet? And you have to run. I mean, it's a race. Any startup that doesn't feel it's in a race is on the wrong track. It is a race, and it's a cutthroat race. If you're not paranoid, you're gone. So what I say, the ones who run fast, Jumia, Swivel, etc., they made it. Kareem, you have to expand. You cannot settle in a limited market. Sometimes not even Egypt. Sometimes, or most of the startups are limited to Cairo. This is crazy. This is nothing. So you have to expand your horizon and grow. Otherwise, you won't make the big success stories and exits that we all look for.
I agree, and it is a race, but this race is over, this panel. So I'll just start with Ahmed. Gomaa, if you can just give parting words for the audience in the last few seconds, because every time I look at this audience, I'm like, wow, the diversity of the people here. What would you like to tell them?
What I'd like to tell them is a big question, but in general, this is the right time, it's the right environment. The government is pushing for more involvement. The platforms are there, VCs are there. A lot of talent is here. I think it's just waiting for you to make the right points. Now, product market fit will always be their number one. The number one I think factor that is going to take your startup to the next phase. Look to capture Egypt first before you start thinking of international markets, and of course it's Africa and the MENA region. And ultimately look for ways to build your team. And that's a difficult one. Building the team is a lot of effort between bringing the right pool of talent and messaging the strategy correctly into the investment, into the team. And last but not least, there's a little bit of luck that actually we all aspire to have. Yeah.
It's a little bit of luck and science and art to it. I don't know what the balance between each is, but I hope we get the formula right one day.
We'll take luck anytime. Huh?
Any luck, as much luck as I can get today. Thank you, everyone. This was fabulous. Thank you. Thank you.